All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So our objective for today is that students will be able to apply the rules of exponents to perform operations with numbers expressed in scientific notation. So same objective that we had yesterday, except that today we're focusing on division. So dividing numbers that are expressed in scientific notation. So just one more really quick example of scientific notation, just like we saw yesterday. Just like it can be used for very large numbers, it can also be used for very small numbers. So for example, the mass of a proton, right? Protons are extremely tiny, is written as 0 point, bunch of zeros, and some numbers at the end, right? So that's a very small number, right? And just like yesterday, it can be very easy to miss some of those zeros. So instead of writing it with all of those zeros, a faster and a more efficient way to write it is with scientific notation. So in this case here, we actually have a negative exponent of negative 27, which tells us that the number is extremely small. So just remember what this negative 27 means. If I want to go from this number to that number, the way I would do that is take the decimal point from here, and I need to move it to the left 27 times, which means that I end up with 26 zeros to the left of this one digit here, and then the decimal point. Now, getting to the practice for today, right? Yesterday we saw multiplying numbers written in scientific notation. Today we're going to be dividing numbers written in scientific notation. Now, when you come across these problems, you're going to be seeing them written two different ways. They both mean the same thing. So you might see it with a division sign. So I see 8.4 times 10 to the 16th divided by 2.5 times 10 to the 5th. Now, second way you might see it is written as a fraction, but again, it means the same thing. 8.4 times 10 to the 16th. Remember that we can read a fraction and say that means divided by 2.5 times 10 to the 5th. But the way that we're going to approach this is exactly the same as how we did it yesterday. First, we're going to group the numbers together and use this operation of division instead of the multiplication that we saw yesterday. So the first step, and it's actually a little bit easier to see if I'm looking at what I have on the right-hand side with that fraction, right? So with the fraction, it's easy to see that, okay, I'm actually going to split this. So I'm going to do 8.4 divided by 2.5, and then 10 to the 16th divided by 10 to the 5th. All right, so let me just write that out using a division sign instead. So first taking the numbers, I got 8.4 divided by 2.5. And then I'm going to multiply that by what I get from my scientific notation part, the 10 to the 16th. So 10 to the 16th divided by 10 to the 5th. All right. Now, all we do is we put these parts into a calculator. So the first part, 8.4 divided by 2.5, 8.4 divided by 2.5 gives me 3.36. And you can see when I put divided by in the calculator, it actually turns it into a fraction like that second part. So the number part that I'm left with is 3.36. It's going to be multiplied by 10. I got to figure out the power, right? So now I have 10 to the 16th divided by 10 to the 5th. That is actually the quotient rule, which we learned last week. The quotient rule tells us to keep the base the same, so the 10 stays, and I subtract the exponents, don't divide them. So 16 minus 5 gives me an exponent of 11. So 3.36 times 10 to the 11th power is my final answer when I divide those two. Again, you're going to see these questions written both ways, okay? So if you want, pause the video, try to re-watch that section if it looks a little bit confusing there, okay? Now, what you're going to actually do for practice is just the same exact thing that we just did here, but I've got some steps here just like yesterday to help you with it. First, you group the numbers together like I did here. So I took the 8.2, the 8.4, the 2.5, I'm dividing the 2. I group the powers together, so the 10 to the 16th, the 10 to the 5, I group those together. And then lastly, divide the numbers first, divide the powers using that quotient rule, which again tells us we need to subtract the exponents, all right? Only thing I'm gonna say is be careful with the sign of your exponents, right? It's always gonna be the numerator, so 16, minus the denominator 5, right? you may run into some examples where you end up with a negative exponent, right? If this was reversed and instead of being 10 to the 16th, let's say that it was reversed, right? It was 10 to the 5th over 10 to the 16th. Now I'm still going to do the top minus the bottom. So I would instead do, and if you're not great with this stuff, use a calculator. 5 minus 16 is negative 11, right? So in that case, I would actually have an exponent of negative 11 instead of positive 11, right? So just be careful there. Make sure you're putting the right number in, all right? After you finish with that, you're gonna go to the last section just to IXL to practice with what we did yesterday and today, multiplying and dividing with numbers written in scientific notation, okay? So good luck. I will see you in the Zoom session to practice this some more. Have a great day.